These are the geography facts that change how a map feels, what rivers measure, what borders permit, and how cities and roads reshape land itself. From the South Pole to Macau, every episode shows location doing the real work. The Nile is the world's longest river, but it does not carry the most water. It runs about 7,088 kilometers from inland Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, crossing dry land for most of its course. Length measures distance, while water volume measures how much flow passes a point, and a river's basin and rainfall decide that difference. That is why the Amazon, Congo, and Yangtze can move far more water even though the Nile stretches farther across the map. For millennia, the Nile's long path shaped farms, trade, and settlement along its banks, showing how river shape can guide human life, not just the flow record. Macau tripled its usable land by building new ground outward from the shoreline, not by spreading inland. Macau is a small peninsula and a set of islands, so water and steep limits left very little room for normal growth. The change came from land reclamation, which means filling shallow sea or mudflats to create new land at the edge. That new ground made room for roads, housing, and public facilities, easing pressure inside the old city. Macau's map now shows how a coast can be reshaped when every square meter matters, and the shoreline itself becomes a decision. Mercer Island Station sits inside Interstate 90 because the rail line and the freeway had to share one narrow strip of land. Mercer Island lies between Seattle and the east side, where the crossing space is tight and the land is bounded by water on both sides. When Interstate 90 was built and later rebuilt, planners reserved room for transit so trains could use the same corridor instead of finding new land. The immediate result was a station with direct access to both regional rail and a major freeway crossing, all packed into the island's middle. It shows how geography can force transport to stack instead of spread, and the station still works because the corridor decision left a permanent trace. In Wisconsin, some communities are real on the ground before they ever become full municipalities, so mapmakers track them as place names instead of solid borders. A municipality is an incorporated local government, but many Wisconsin settlements stay unincorporated, meaning they have a shared name and daily life without their own city or village boundary. That creates the cartographic contradiction. The place exists in settlement patterns, but on official maps it may appear only as a point, a label, or an inventory entry. The immediate result is practical. Agencies, planners, and cartographers have to record these communities differently, because there is a place to name even when there is no incorporated border to draw. For people who live there, the name still guides mail, directions, and local identity, while the state inventory keeps a quieter record of where the settlement sits and how it is recognized. This Ontario bridge was named with an Ojibwe word for dawn, or morning light, so the crossing itself points to first light before it points to traffic. The bridge sits in a place where roads, water, and settlement meet, so a name there works like a map label and a local memory at once. The turning point came when local naming choices made room for Indigenous language, letting an Ojibwe meaning stay visible in an everyday piece of infrastructure. The immediate result is simple but powerful. Commuters cross the bridge, and the name quietly keeps a local language present in public space. So the bridge does two jobs at once: it carries people over water, and it carries a word that links engineering to Indigenous place meaning, leaving a naming decision behind in the landscape. At Ashmore and Cartier, the rule changes with the boat. Some Indonesian fishers may enter only if their craft has no motor or engine. These islands sit close to northern Australia, beside sea routes that have connected nearby coastal communities for generations. The difference is movement. Engines let boats travel faster, farther, and with less dependence on wind, so the same water becomes a very different kind of access. So the border rule narrows entry to boats that match older fishing methods, while motorized boats are treated as crossing into a different zone of access. That makes the rule less about the fish alone and more about preserving a small corridor shaped by distance, tradition, and control at sea, leaving one clear document behind. Gabriel Boric became the first Latin American leader to stand at the South Pole, and the real story is the distance it takes to get there. The South Pole sits on a high ice plateau, far from ports, cities, and normal transport routes, where every visit depends on weather, fuel, and aircraft range. Boric's trip mattered because reaching that point is not symbolic alone. It requires a chain of decisions that turns a map location into a real national presence. The immediate consequence was simple. A Latin American head of state was physically present in one of the planet's most inaccessible places, linking diplomacy to logistics. For Chile, the visit placed Antarctica inside a South American political story, where ice, distance, and supply lines shape what presence actually means, and the record now sits with that decision. A mosque can resemble Indonesia's parliamentary complex because both use the same broad, layered silhouette from above. In Indonesia, public buildings often sit inside dense cities, so their roof shapes read clearly against streets, water, and open grounds. The resemblance comes from form, not function. Domes, wings, and curved edges create a civic profile that the eye recognizes fast. That visual echo can make a worship place feel tied to state power, even when the buildings serve different daily purposes. It shows how architecture travels across a landscape as a shared language, turning one roofline into a reminder of public life, belief, and the decision to build. If one place changed how you think about maps, wait until you compare the next one. Subscribe for more geography that explains why the world looks the way it does.